So Mr. Blythe is a personal friend of mine who I've known for some time. As a result of press reports that he had read in September, he raised with me at that time his concern that his cousin, the Prime Minister, was reported in these press reports to have some difficulties. Mr. Blythe raised with me the fact that he was interested in feeling about whether he should do something to help. He raised that with me at a private dinner at his house. I said to him at that time, "You may be a family member, but you need to be very careful. Things need to be done by the book. There are rules in this country, and these rules exist for a good reason. You're a foreigner, and therefore, before you contemplate doing anything or providing any assistance to the Prime Minister, you should involve the Cabinet Office."
Clearly nothing to see here. Yes. What was that Bodge said? That there's absolutely no way that Richard Sharp knew anything about my financial problems. Myriad of piff and whatever. Clearly he's lying, isn't he?
Let's look at Boris Johnson's loan. As we've heard, his cousin approached you at a dinner party and said he wanted to give Boris Johnson a lot of money because, again, to use your phrase, he was in some difficulties.
He did not say that.
He didn't say he wanted to give him money?
No, he didn't. He said he wanted to help him.
Well, what does that mean?
Of course, it implies that it could be money or anything else. He didn't say a lot of money.
Right, so let's not dance on the head of a pin. He wanted...
Now, he was talking like this with Damien Green, and do you know what the first word spoke to me? His language spoke of lawyer talk to me. It just reeked of it. What do you guys think?
To help him out of his difficulties because the Prime Minister couldn't manage on his £164,000 salary. I'm still not quite clear why he didn't, since he was a cousin, just ask Boris Johnson directly. Do you want some cash, cuz?
Well, again, I'd say that it's probably worth recalling what was going on at the time. We had no vaccine. We faced
muddy in the water in my eyes here. Yeah, it's just lawyer talk for me.
Faced a national crisis. We had an economy that was collapsing, potentially. We had no vaccine. And he was concerned that his cousin should focus on the job.
Quite. So the cousin would have taken the phone call, clearly, if he phoned up and said, "I want to help you out financially." Now, originally, we've discussed this.
May I come back to answer?
Yes, please, perhaps in the next answer. You told journalists that the dinner was in November 2020. Now, you've said that the journalists have said they got that wrong. The Sunday Times journalists actually said that they think you got that wrong in the initial briefing that your representative gave them. But that's, we can leave that to one side, because, of course, it would have been illegal to have had a dinner in November because COVID lockdown was on. So you now say that the conversation with Mr. Blythe was in September. In other words, before you applied for the BBC chairmanship post. Yeah. So Boris Johnson knew you were helping him effectively with the £800,000 loan when you applied for it.
No, he didn't. He did. First of all, I did not help with any loan. Just to be clear,
facilitated.
I think the detail, as you said, matters.
So made the introduction. So Boris Johnson knew that you'd made an introduction between him and his cousin, who apparently needed introduced to him, even though he was his cousin, and you'd made that introduction. £800,000 was the figure, huge amount of money, and Boris Johnson knew that this was happening, was in the pipeline before you applied for the BBC chair post.
With respect, Mr. Nicholson, there are a lot of things you just said are incorrect, and if you may, I'd like to answer them in detail.
Please continue.
Thank you. So when the dinner that I had with Mr. Blythe was in September, and at that time there was no figure mentioned at all. There was no mention of it being a loan. It was clearly financial, but there was no specific figure. And I actually don't believe that there has been any knowledge of what financing has been provided. And all I have seen is Mr. Blythe commenting publicly, saying that the amount speculated is wrong.
But that doesn't mean much. It could be 750 or it could be 950. We knew the scale of the Prime Minister's difficulties were sufficient that his multimillionaire cousin needed to step in and help him. So let's not dwell on the exact amount. There was a lot of money.
May I address some of the other issues you raised that I think
yes.
are correct? Okay. So, as I said, when I when I went to meet the Prime Minister and told him that I wanted to apply to be the chair of the BBC, at that point I hadn't heard from Mr. Blythe asking me to put him in touch with Mr. Case. So as far as I was concerned at that time, that was something that had happened in a dinner party conversation in September. And when I had the conversation with the Prime Minister about wanting to apply to be the chair of the BBC, that I had no knowledge at that point that Mr. Blythe was doing anything to take it anything further forward.
So you didn't say to the Prime Minister, your cousin's looking to help you out?
No, I did not.
Okay, so although you discussed the loan with Mr. Blythe, Boris Johnson's cousin, in September 2020, you didn't actually go to see the Cabinet Secretary until December, so quite a long time afterwards. At that discussion with the Cabinet Secretary, did anyone else attend? Were any minutes taken?
Well, this comes back to answering one of your earlier questions, which is at that meeting I raised with the Cabinet Secretary that I was in the application process for the BBC chairmanship. And therefore, at that time, we discussed precisely that to avoid a conflict or the appearance of conflict, I should have nothing further to do with it. At that meeting, there were two people. I was there and Mr. Case was there.
So nobody was taking notes. Now, you told the media show...
Mr. Case was, I believe, taking notes.
Yeah, but you would have expected a civil servant to be right there rather than the Cabinet Secretary taking his own notes. Now, you told the media show that you told Boris Johnson you were going to see the Cabinet Secretary about the loan. So when Boris Johnson says that you knew nothing about his financial affairs, and to quote him, he was ding-dang sure about that. Well, that's obviously untrue.
Well, yeah, of course it is. Now, I had listened to James O'Brien and he said something really, really interesting. I think there's an element, quite a lot of truth. You can always tell when Boris is lying because his language or rhetoric goes OTT. That's a myriad piffle of whatever, and myriad possible of piffle, whatever words he used. And you could pretty much almost tell his line, and that were a bit of, you could say a bit of a penny drop moment, I think. He's trying to make it out clearly that there was no business, if you scratch my back, I'll scratch your. Yeah, obviously not. There is clearly more questions to answer in there, and there's clearly something dodgy gone on, aren't there, here?